February looks dead. It's not. While everyone's waiting for spring, smart gardeners are already planting. Get these 8 seeds in right now, and you'll be eating fresh harvests while your neighbors are still buying supermarket produce. Miss this window? You've already lost. I learned this the hard way. My first February, I waited. Massive mistake. My neighbor was pulling greens in April while I had nothing. That lit a fire under me. Before we start, subscribe, hit like, and turn on notifications. You don't want to miss what's coming. Here's the secret most gardeners never learn. Certain crops don't just survive cold, they crave it. Plant them now and nature does half the work for you. Fight the season and you'll struggle all year. Ready for the 8 crops that change everything? Let's go. First up, and this is absolutely one of my favorites, lettuce. Now you might be thinking, lettuce in February? Surely that's madness. But here's what most people don't realize. Lettuce actually doesn't mind cool conditions at all. What it hates is being repeatedly hit with hard, penetrating frosts. So the secret here is just a tiny bit of protection. I'm talking about a cold frame, an unheated greenhouse, even a makeshift cloche made from a plastic bottle. Just something to take the edge off the absolute worst of the cold. I start mine in small pots or trays using a nice fine potting mix. You don't need anything fancy, just standard multi-purpose compost works brilliantly. The seeds are tiny, so I sow them quite thinly across the surface. Here's the key though. Lettuce seeds actually need a bit of light to germinate, so don't bury them. Just cover them with the barest whisper of compost so they're barely out of view. That's it. Keep the compost lightly moist, not soaking wet, because soggy conditions will kill lettuce seedlings faster than cold ever will. They're vulnerable to damping off disease, which is basically when they just keel over and die from too much moisture. Check them every couple of days, give them a gentle water when needed, and in about a week to 10 days, you'll see those first little leaves poking through. Once they've got a couple of true leaves, I prick them out into individual plugs or small pots and grow them on for another 2 to 3 weeks. Then they go out into the garden, spaced about 10 inches or 25 centimeters apart. And here's the beautiful part. If you time this right and the weather cooperates even slightly, you could be cutting fresh lettuce leaves in as little as 6 to 8 weeks from now. That's March or early April. While everyone else is still planting their gardens, you're already eating homegrown salads. Choose varieties that are bred for cooler conditions. They'll handle the unpredictable February weather far better than summer varieties. And honestly, there's something incredibly satisfying about defying the season and growing fresh greens when the world outside still looks pretty bleak. Right, next one. Pea shoots. And listen, if you've never grown pea shoots before, you're missing out on one of the absolute easiest and most rewarding crops you can grow at this time of year. These things are phenomenal. They germinate quickly, they grow fast, and they give you a gorgeous crop within just 2 to 3 weeks. I'm not exaggerating. Now, you can buy varieties that are sold specifically for pea shoots, and those work brilliantly. But here's a clever trick. If you've got old pea seeds lying around that you're not sure are still viable, sow them for pea shoots. Even if some don't germinate, you'll still get plenty, and there's zero waste. I love that. I use shallow trays or containers. Anything about 3 to 4 inches deep works perfectly. Line it with newspaper if there are holes in the sides, fill it with compost, and then scatter your pea seeds across the surface. Space them about 1 inch, or maybe 3 centimeters apart. That sounds incredibly close, and it is. But we're cutting them young as shoots, not growing them to full maturity, so it's absolutely fine. Cover them with about 1 inch of compost, give them a good water, and put them somewhere bright and cool. A greenhouse bench is ideal, but honestly, even a bright windowsill indoors will work. They don't need heat. In fact, they grow perfectly well in cool conditions, which makes them ideal for February. Within about 3 to 5 weeks, depending on the weather, they'll be ready to harvest. You're looking for shoots that are about 4 to 6 inches or 10 to 15 centimeters tall. Just snip them off with scissors. And here's the magic. If you cut them carefully just above a leaf node, they'll regrow for a second cutting. How good is that? Pea shoots aren't just a garnish, by the way. They're sweet, crunchy, and absolutely delicious in salads, stir-fries, or even just eaten straight from the tray while you're standing in the greenhouse. Ask me how I know. If you want something fast and incredibly satisfying to grow right now, pea shoots are your answer. Now let's talk radishes, and specifically a variety called French breakfast. These are the ones with the beautiful white tips, and they're properly lovely. Quick growing, crunchy, and with just the right amount of peppery bite. Radishes are brilliant for February sowing because they're one of the first crops you'll actually harvest from outside. Now you can sow radishes directly into the ground if your soil's workable, but I prefer starting them in plug trays in late winter. It gives me a head start of about 2 weeks, and it means I can keep a close eye on them while they're at their most vulnerable. I use a technique called multi-sowing, which sounds fancy, but it's dead simple. Instead of 1 seed per plug, I sow about 5 seeds per plug. They'll grow as a little cluster of seedlings, and then I plant them out exactly as they are. The beauty of this approach is it saves time and it actually spreads out your harvest. As the radishes mature, you pick the biggest ones first, which then gives the smaller ones room to size up. So instead of a massive glut all at once, you get a steady trickle of radishes over a few weeks. Clever, right? Space your clusters about 6 inches or 15 centimeters apart when you plant them out. They'll be happy in a cold frame or even just outside with a bit of fleece or row cover for protection. And here's why February is actually the smart time to sow radishes. They bolt, which means they flower prematurely, when it gets hot or when days get really long. By sowing now, they mature in cooler conditions and you avoid that whole problem. You're looking at about 5 to 6 weeks from sowing to harvest if the weather's halfway decent. And when you pull those first radishes, still crisp and fresh, there's honestly nothing better. I love slicing them paper thin with a mandolin for salads, or making quick refrigerator pickles by covering sliced radishes with a warm solution of vinegar, water, salt, and sugar. They're absolutely delicious, and they don't last long. Not because they go off, but because they get eaten so fast. Right, spinach. This is one of those crops that people drastically underestimate for winter and early spring growing. And here's why spinach in February is actually genius. Spinach absolutely hates hot weather. The moment temperatures climb and days get long, it bolts and goes to seed. Game over. But sow it now in cool conditions and it's perfectly happy. It grows steadily, produces gorgeous dark green leaves, and keeps going for weeks. The variety I'm using is called Metadania, which is specifically bred for cooler conditions. There's also one called Giant Winter, which is brilliant too. These varieties are tougher, more reliable, and far less likely to give up on you when the weather does something unpredictable, which, in February, is basically guaranteed. I start spinach in modules, or plug trays, sowing 2 or 3 seeds per plug. Push them down about ½ inch deep, cover them over, and keep them somewhere protected. An unheated greenhouse or cold frame is perfect. You don't need heat, just protection from the absolute worst of the weather. And here's the critical bit. Spinach will tolerate cold, but it won't stand having its roots sitting in freezing wet soil. So keep the compost just barely moist, not sodden. Once they're up and have a few proper leaves, plant them out about 8 inches or 20 centimeters apart. And within about 6 to 8 weeks from sowing, you can start harvesting. I take just a few outer leaves from each plant at a time, which means they keep producing new growth from the center. You can keep this going for weeks, sometimes months if you're lucky. Fresh spinach is a completely different thing to the stuff you buy in supermarkets. It's tender, it's sweet, and it's packed with nutrients. Chuck it into salads, wilt it into pasta, blend it into smoothies. Honestly, once you start growing your own, you'll never go back to buying it. And the fact that you can get it started in February, while most people are still indoors, that's just brilliant. Moving on to beetroot, and specifically a variety called Bolt Hardy. Now the name tells you everything you need to know. It's been bred to resist bolting, which is crucial for early sowings. Beetroot is one of those crops that really doesn't like being transplanted. Disturb the roots too much, and they sulk. So we're growing them in modules and then planting them out with absolute minimal fuss. Each beetroot seed is actually a cluster that can produce multiple seedlings. That's fine. We're multi-sowing these too. I aim for about 4 seeds per plug, which usually gives me 4 to 6 seedlings. They'll grow as a little cluster and get planted out exactly as they are, spaced about a foot or 30 centimeters apart. And here's the clever bit about multi-sowing beetroot. As they mature, you harvest the largest roots first, which then gives the remaining smaller ones space to grow on. So again, you're spreading out your harvest rather than getting everything ready at once. It's just smart gardening. Bolt Hardy beetroot is, in my honest opinion, the tastiest variety out there. I've tried plenty of fancy ones with different colors and shapes, but I always come back to this. It's reliable, it tastes incredible whether you roast it, pickle it, or eat it raw in salads, and it stores well if you want to keep some for later in the year. Get these in now and you'll be pulling fresh beetroot in about 10 to 12 weeks. There's honestly nothing better than roasted beetroot, still warm with just a drizzle of olive oil and a pinch of salt. Or sliced thin in a salad with some goat cheese and walnuts. Absolutely stunning. And knowing you got them started back in February when it was still properly cold makes it taste even better. Broad beans, or fava beans depending on where you are. Now, full disclosure, I actually sowed some of these earlier in the autumn, and they got hit by frost. Look, these things happen. They grew too tall and fleshy, which made them vulnerable, and a hard frost just knocked them back. So I'm sowing more now as a backup. Late February is actually a really smart time for broad beans because they'll grow slowly and stay compact, which makes them far less vulnerable to frost damage. You can sow them directly into the ground if your soil's workable, or start them in deep pots or root trainers to give them a head start. I'm sowing 2 beans per plug, pushing them down about 1 inch to 2 inches deep. They're big seeds, so they're easy to handle and really satisfying to sow. Keep them somewhere protected from mice, because mice absolutely love broad bean seeds. I actually put mine in a plastic tub with the lid on until they've germinated, just to keep them safe. Once they're up and looking sturdy, plant them out about 8 inches or 20 centimeters apart. They'll grow into bushy plants that produce pods packed with beans. And here's something most people don't know. Broad beans are phenomenal for your mental health. There's actual science behind this. They contain compounds that boost mood and reduce stress. Growing them, tending them, and eventually eating them is genuinely good for you on multiple levels. Harvest them when the pods are plump, but before they get too old and tough. Young broad beans are sweet and tender and absolutely delicious. You can eat them raw, steam them lightly, or mash them up with olive oil and lemon for an incredible dip. They're versatile, nutritious, and deeply satisfying to grow. Now here's something I only started doing last year that's been an absolute game changer. Spring onions or scallions. These are so easy, so quick, and so useful in the kitchen that I genuinely can't believe I wasn't growing them earlier. And February is a brilliant time to get them going. Spring onions germinate quickly, even in cool conditions, and they're ready to harvest in about 8 to 10 weeks. You can sow them directly into the ground or into modules, whichever you prefer. I usually do modules because it gives me more control and I can plant them out when conditions are right. Sow about 5 to 6 seeds per module, or scatter them thinly in a shallow drill if you're sowing direct. Cover them with about 1 inch of compost, water them in, and that's it. They're not fussy. They don't need heat, they don't need special treatment, they just grow. When you plant them out, space them about 1 inch or 2 apart. Yes, really that close. They're not forming big bulbs like regular onions, so they don't need loads of space. And as they grow, you can start harvesting them as soon as they're thick enough to bother with. Pull the biggest ones first, which gives the others room to fatten up. Fresh spring onions have so much more flavor than anything you'll buy. Use them in salads, stir-fries, as a garnish, chopped into scrambled eggs. Honestly, anywhere you'd use regular onions, but want a milder, fresher flavor. And the fact that they're ready so quickly means you can make successive sowings every few weeks and have fresh spring onions basically all season long. Last one, and this is a proper workhorse of the vegetable garden: kale. Now, kale has a reputation for being a tough winter crop, and it absolutely is. But starting it in February for spring and early summer harvest is actually incredibly smart. It establishes well in cool conditions, and by the time warmer weather arrives, it's already got strong roots and good growth. I sow kale into modules, 2 or 3 seeds per plug, and keep them in a cold frame or greenhouse to germinate. They don't need heat, just protection from heavy rain and the worst frosts. Once they're up and have a few true leaves, I thin them to 1 seedling per plug if they're crowded, or just leave them if they're not. Kale takes a bit longer than some of the other crops we've talked about. You're looking at about 8 to 10 weeks before you can start harvesting, but once it gets going, it keeps producing for months. You can pick individual leaves as you need them, which means the plant keeps growing and producing new leaves from the center. Choose a variety that suits your taste. Curly kale is traditional and very hardy, but dinosaur kale, or Cavolo Nero, has this gorgeous dark texture and slightly sweeter flavor that I absolutely love. Red Russian kale is beautiful too, with purple-tinged leaves that look stunning in the garden. Kale is packed with nutrients, it's versatile in the kitchen, and it's genuinely one of the easiest vegetables to grow. Massage it with a bit of olive oil and lemon juice for salads, chuck it into soups and stews, bake it into crisps, or just sauté it with garlic as a side dish. It's brilliant however you use it. So there you have it, 8 crops that are absolutely perfect for February sowing. Lettuce for early salads, pea shoots for quick satisfaction, French breakfast radishes for that peppery crunch, Metadania spinach for those gorgeous greens, bolt-hardy beetroot for roasting and pickling, broad beans for both mental and physical health, spring onions for constant fresh flavor, and kale for long-term harvesting. Every single one will reward you for getting them in early. February isn't about waiting for perfect conditions. It's about being strategic, choosing the right crops, and taking advantage of this narrow window when smart gardeners get ahead of the game. Get these seeds in now, and you'll be harvesting fresh produce in spring while everyone else is still just getting started. That's the difference between reacting and planning, between following and leading. Before you go, if you found this helpful, smash that like button. It genuinely helps more people discover these videos. And if you've got questions about any of these crops, or you want to tell me what you're sowing this February, drop a comment below. I read every single one, and I love hearing what you're all growing. If you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next video. In a couple weeks, I'll be showing you exactly what I'm sowing in March, and trust me, there are some absolute crackers coming up that you won't want to miss.